I hate you, Zariah whispered, her back pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window of Hollis Rowe's penthouse, the Pacific Northwest coastline disappearing into fog behind her like a photograph slowly dissolving at its edges. His hand was beside her head, not touching, never touching, without her explicit permission, but close enough that she could smell his cologne, mixed with the bitter darkness of espresso he'd been drinking when she'd confronted him. Say it again. His voice held the same measured control he probably used in boardrooms when dismantling competitors. Before we continue, like this video if you've ever felt invisible in a world that only sees credentials and titles. Share it with someone who needs to hear that courage doesn't require permission. And subscribe so you don't miss what happens when one temp worker sees the truth everyone else is paid to ignore. Now let's continue. I hate you. Her voice didn't shake. It never shook, not even when she was terrified, not even when she was lying through her teeth. His pale gray eyes, the exact color of the fog outside, studied her with clinical precision. Lie to me one more time, Zariah. I find it fascinating how your pupils dilate every time you do. She wanted to shove him. Wanted to run. Wanted to rewind 6 weeks to when she'd been just a waitress who'd smiled at a lonely child and thought nothing would ever come of it. You've been watching me. Her voice cracked despite her control. Since before I even walked into that restaurant, you knew about the manager. About Louisiana. About everything I've been running from. And you let me think I was safe. Hollis didn't step back. Didn't deny it. He never denied the ugly truths. The manager was selling your location to 4 different parties, he said, pulling his phone from his pocket with deliberate precision. 50,000, 75,000, 120,000, 95,000, 4 separate buyers, 8 months of transactions. I've been monitoring every single one. The screen glowed between them, like evidence at a crime scene. You were never safe, Zariah. You just didn't know you were valuable yet. Chapter 1. Hollis stepped back from the window and the air between them shifted. Less confrontation, more negotiation. He walked to his desk with the kind of precision that made Zariah think of surgeons, or men who'd learned early that wasted movement was wasted money. The tablet he picked up was already unlocked, screen glowing with rows of data she couldn't read from where she stood. Come here, he said. Not a command, an invitation that felt like one anyway. She didn't move, her spine was still pressed to the glass, fog rolling outside like the ocean had learned to breathe. The Pacific Northwest did that, made weather feel sentient, like it was watching alongside everyone else. Zariah. His voice was patient in the way that people with infinite resources were patient. You can look at the evidence standing there, or you can look at it sitting down. Either way, you're gonna look at it. She crossed the room because what else was there to do? Run back to the guest house he'd installed her in 6 weeks ago? Pretend she hadn't already chosen this the moment she'd accepted his protection instead of disappearing properly? The tablet showed a spreadsheet, clean columns, timestamps, dollar amounts that made her stomach drop. Transaction logs, Hollis said, zooming in on the first entry. Your former employer, Marcus, the restaurant manager who supposedly helped you disappear from Louisiana, has been selling your location to interested parties. 4 separate buyers over the past 8 months. Zariah stared at the numbers. $50,000, 75,000, 120,000, 95,000. He sold me. Her voice came out flat. She'd learned a long time ago not to let shock sound like shock. 4 times. To 4 different entities, using shell companies, and encrypted payment channels. Hollis scrolled through account details she couldn't process fast enough. The first request came through 3 months after you started working at the restaurant. Marcus provided your work schedule, your apartment address, photographs taken during your shifts. You've been monitoring this. Not a question. For 8 months, yes, 8 months. She'd been working at that restaurant for 10, which meant Hollis had been watching her, tracking the people tracking her. For almost the entire time, she'd thought she was invisible. Why didn't you tell me? The question came out harder than she meant it to. Why let me keep working there, thinking I was safe? He looked at her then, really looked, with those pale gray eyes that processed information the way most people processed breath. Because I needed to see who else was watching. And I needed you to trust me organically. You used me as bait. I used you as a detector. He said it like there was an actual distinction. There's a difference between putting you in danger and observing danger that already existed. You were never safe, Zariah. Marcus made sure of that. I simply documented it. She wanted to hate the logic, couldn't quite manage it. Hollis pulled up another file. This one was older. Scanned documents with courthouse stamps and redaction marks that looked like someone had taken a black marker to history itself. While I was monitoring the location sales, I started pulling everything I could find on you. Which wasn't much. No credit history before age 18. No school records before age 12. Foster care placement in Louisiana with origin listed as protective custody. Court sealed. He zoomed in on her birth certificate. Her mother's name, Maya Bloom, was there, but half of it had been blacked out in thick marker strokes before the document was ever filed. That's not standard procedure, Hollis said quietly. That's witness protection protocol. The room tilted. Zariah gripped the edge of his desk. And then there's this. Another file. Bank statements going back 18 years. Monthly deposits of $2,000 into an account she'd never known existed. Estate Services, LLC listed as the sender. $432,000 total, accumulating from the time she was 8 years old until 3 months ago, when she turned 26. Someone's been paying to keep you hidden, Hollis said. The moment those payments stopped triggering location security, the requests started coming through. You're not running from a crime. You're running from protection that expired. Zariah couldn't breathe right. The fog outside pressed against the glass like it wanted in. My mother died when I was 8. It came out automatic, the story she'd been telling herself. For 18 years. Car accident. I went into foster care because there was no one else. Did you see the body? The question was gentle but relentless. The way Hollis asked everything when he already knew the answer. She shook her head. They said I couldn't. Too traumatic. Then you don't know she's dead. You know you were told she's dead. There's a significant difference. The room had gone very quiet. Somewhere downstairs, Calder was probably doing homework with one of the nannies. Outside, the fog kept erasing the coastline 1 degree at a time. Hollis set the tablet down and looked at her with something that might have been sympathy if he'd been the kind of man who trafficked in sympathy. I can make you disappear properly, he said. New identity, new city, enough money to start over, no one will find you, or you stay. Help me understand why 4 separate entities want your location badly enough to pay 6 figures for it. We figure out together what you're actually running from. What's in it for you? One of those buyers is a business rival of mine. If they want you, I need to know why. It's not altruism. It's strategy. Zariah looked at the evidence on the screen. At the life she thought she'd been living, now revealed as something constructed by people she'd never met for reasons she didn't understand. No more surveillance without my knowledge, she said finally. No more tests. You tell me everything you know, starting now. Hollis nodded once. Starting with the fact that 3 months ago, my company acquired a defunct defense contractor called Sentinel Systems. And last week one of the people trying to buy your location was their former CEO. Chapter 2. The guest house sat at the edge of the Rowe estate like an afterthought made of glass and cedar, perched where the manicured lawn gave way to wild coastal scrub. Zariah had been living in it for 6 weeks, but she still woke up some mornings expecting to find herself back in the studio apartment above the laundromat where the pipes rattled and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments in surround sound. This was different. This was silent in the way that expensive architecture was silent. Soundproofed, climate-controlled, designed for people who could afford not to hear the world unless they wanted to. She stood at the kitchen counter that first morning after the tablet revelation, drinking coffee that had been delivered by staff she rarely saw, watching fog roll across the property in waves. Hollis had given her access to resources she'd spent her entire adult life not having. Private investigators who returned calls, database subscriptions that cost more per month than her old rent, legal contacts who could unseal documents that had been buried for reasons she was only beginning to understand. The door opened without knocking. Calder walked in carrying a book that was too big for his 7-year-old hands, and wearing pajamas that probably cost more than Zariah's entire wardrobe. You're up early, she said. Nanny Claire says breakfast is at 7:30, but I'm not hungry yet. He climbed onto the bar stool next to her, setting the book down with a thump. Are you investigating? Zariah had learned not to lie to him. Calder had a way of looking at people that suggested he was cataloging inconsistencies for later review, the way his father probably looked at quarterly reports. Yeah, I'm investigating. What are you looking for? I'm trying to figure out why some people want to know where I am. He considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. Do they want to hurt you? I don't know. Maybe they just want to find someone I used to know. Your mom? Zariah's hand stopped halfway to her coffee cup. How did you? Dad told me your mom died when you were little. Like my mom died when I was little. He said it matter-of-factly, the way children said things that would destroy adults. Except Dad thinks maybe your mom didn't actually die. He was talking to Mr. Pike about it. Eamon Pike, Hollis's head of risk intelligence, the man who'd been watching Zariah with K9 precision since before she'd ever stepped foot on this estate. She'd seen him exactly 3 times, always at a distance, always observing, never approaching. Your dad talks to you about his work? No. But I listen when he talks to other people. Calder opened his book. Something about marine biology with photographs of deep-sea creatures that looked like they'd been designed by nightmares. I'm good at listening. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Zariah had learned that Calder didn't need constant conversation the way most kids did. He was content to exist alongside people, observing, processing, occasionally offering commentary that cut through pretense, like his father's legal team cut through contracts. The sound of claws on hardwood announced Nyx before Zoraya saw her. The Belgian Malinois appeared in the doorway, ears forward, eyes locked on Zoraya with the kind of focus that made her understand why military units used dogs like this for operations where human judgment failed. "She likes you," Calder observed. "How can you tell? She sits next to you. She doesn't sit next to most people. Just Dad and me and Mr. Pike." He paused. "And now you." Nyx crossed the room and sat directly beside Zoraya's stool, close enough that Zoraya could feel the warmth of her through her jeans. The dog's eyes never left her face. "What's she doing?" Zoraya asked. "Deciding if you're telling the truth." Calder turned a page in his book, studied a photograph of something with too many teeth. "She can tell when people's hearts beat faster. When they're scared, or lying, or about to make a choice they're not sure about. That's unsettling. Dad says truth is supposed to be unsettling. Otherwise everyone would do it more often." Zoraya reached down slowly, let Nyx sniff her hand. The dog's nose was cold and wet, her assessment clinical. After a moment, Nyx leaned her head against Zoraya's knee. Not aggressive, not submissive, just present in the way that felt like permission granted. "She chose you," Calder said, smiling for the first time that morning. "That means you're part of the pack now." Later, after Calder had been collected by Nanny Claire and taken to whatever structured activities filled the day of a 7-year-old raised by algorithms and hired help, Zoraya opened her laptop and started pulling the files Hollis had given her access to. Sentinel Systems. Defunct defense contractor. Dissolved in 1998 after a whistleblower scandal that had made headlines for exactly one news cycle before being buried under corporate legal maneuvering and aggressive settlement agreements that included silence clauses. She found archived articles from the Seattle Times, the Oregonian, a few trade publications that had covered the defense industry back when print journalism still had teeth. The details were sparse. Allegations of illegal arms sales to embargoed nations, falsified end-user certificates, testimony in closed federal court that went nowhere because the witness was discredited. The witness's name had been redacted in every document Zoraya could find, but there was a photograph, not in the news articles. Those had been scrubbed clean, but in a congressional hearing record that someone had scanned and uploaded to a database that probably shouldn't have been accessible to civilians, even civilians with Hollis Rose resources. 3 people sitting at a table facing a panel of senators. 2 men in suits. 1 woman in the center, black, early 30s, with Zoraya's exact bone structure and her mother's eyes. The caption read, "Sentinel Systems Security Division personnel testifying before Senate Armed Services Committee, May 1998. No names. Just the photograph, and the date, and the knowledge that sometimes the dead came back to life in congressional archives." Zoraya was still staring at the screen when Hollis appeared in her doorway. She hadn't heard him approach. He moved like someone who'd learned early that announcing yourself was a tactical disadvantage. "You found it," he said. Not a question. "This is her." Zoraya's voice came out steadier than she felt. "This is my mother. Maya Bloom, senior security analyst. The woman who tried to expose Sentinel's arms trafficking and got buried for it." Hollis stepped into the room, hands in his pockets. His posture casual in the way that powerful men were casual when they were about to deliver information that would detonate your life. "The company I acquired 3 months ago? They kept personnel archives, including hers. You knew." The accusation hung in the air between them. "I suspected. I confirmed it yesterday." He met her eyes without flinching. "Your mother didn't die in a car accident, Zoraya. She disappeared into witness protection after her testimony failed. And someone's been paying to keep you hidden ever since." Nyx appeared at Hollis's side, but instead of sitting next to him, she crossed the room and pressed herself against Zoraya's legs. The K9's eyes stayed locked on Hollis, not aggressive, but watchful, protective. "Even the dog knows," Zoraya said quietly, "that you're about to ask me to do something dangerous." Hollis's expression didn't change. "I'm about to ask you to decide. Keep hiding from people who already know where you are, or help me figure out why they want you badly enough to pay 6 figures for the privilege." Outside, the fog was rolling back out to sea. Inside, Zoraya felt something she hadn't felt in 18 years. The shape of her mother's absence shifting from death to abandonment, to something that might, if she was brave enough or stupid enough to look directly at it, be protection. "Tell me about the buyers," she said. "All 4 of them. Everything you know." Hollis's smile was thin and sharp and entirely without warmth. Finally, the right question. Chapter 3. Hollis pulled up the files in Zoraya's guest house instead of his office, which told her something about the conversation they were about to have. When a man who controlled boardrooms worth billions chose to operate on your territory, it meant he was either giving you power or taking it away so subtly you wouldn't notice until it was gone. The tablet screen glowed between them on the coffee table. 4 names, 4 shell companies, 4 payment amounts that had purchased her location like she was a package being tracked through logistics software. Buyer 1, Hollis said, tapping the first entry. Meridian Consulting Group, $50,000. Registered in Delaware, operated out of a virtual office in Miami. Trace back to a private equity firm that specializes in distressed defense contracts. What does that mean in actual English? It means they buy weapons companies that are failing and strip them for parts, technology, patents, personnel. His finger moved to the second name. Buyer 2, $75,000. Archway Security Solutions. Another shell, this one registered in the Caymans. Same ultimate owner as Buyer 1. Zariah felt something cold settle in her stomach. They bought my location twice? Different timestamps, different approaches. The first purchase got them your work schedule and apartment. The second got them your banking information and your vehicle registration. Hollis's voice was clinical, the way doctors probably sounded when explaining how a disease progressed. They were building a complete profile. And the other two? Buyer 3, $120,000. Significantly higher price point, which suggests either urgency or specific intelligence about your value. He pulled up a document that looked like it had been written in legal code. Vanguard Risk Assessment. Registered in Luxembourg, operated through a network of subsidiary companies across 8 countries. Took me 4 weeks to trace it back to the source. He turned the tablet toward her. The name at the bottom of the corporate chain made her hands go numb. Thomas Carver, Chief Executive Officer. That name means something to you? Hollis asked, watching her face with the same attention Nix used when detecting elevated heart rates. He was in the photograph. The congressional hearing. The man in the center. Zariah's throat felt tight. He was sitting next to my mother. He wasn't just sitting next to her. He was her boss. Hollis pulled up another file. Personnel records from Sentinel Systems. Archived and indexed with the kind of thorough documentation that suggested someone had known these files would matter someday. Thomas Carver was CEO of Sentinel from 1992 to 1998. Your mother was senior security analyst reporting directly to him. She worked for the man who was trafficking arms. She worked for him until she discovered what he was doing. Then she tried to destroy him. Hollis scrolled through testimony transcripts, emails with redacted names, evidence logs that went nowhere. The federal case collapsed because Carver's legal team discredited her, claimed she fabricated everything out of revenge for being passed over for promotion. By the time the Senate hearing happened, Maya's testimony was already considered unreliable. The investigation died 6 months later, and Carver walked away clean, cleaner than clean. Sentinel dissolved. He took a golden parachute, and he's been operating in private intelligence ever since. Hollis's expression was grim. He spent 20 years building a network of clients who need problems to disappear. Governments, corporations, individuals who can afford his rates. He's very good at making things, and people, vanish. Zariah stared at the photograph of her mother sitting beside the man who destroyed her credibility and sent her into hiding. What about Buyer 4? Hollis hesitated. It was the first time she'd seen him pause before delivering information, and that pause told her more than the words that followed. Buyer 4 is me. The room went very quiet. Outside, the fog had returned, pressing against the windows like it wanted to hear this conversation too. You bought my location. I monitored a transaction request that came through one of my subsidiary companies. When I saw the pattern, 4 separate buyers, escalating prices, all connected to Sentinel Systems in one way or another, I realized someone was treating you like an asset in a corporate acquisition. His voice was level, factual. So I treated you like one too. You tracked me before the restaurant. Before Calder. Before any of this. The betrayal tasted like copper. Everything you said about testing how strangers treat your son was true, but incomplete. Hollis met her eyes without flinching. I've been monitoring Carver's movements for 8 months, because he's been trying to acquire portions of Sentinel's old client base. When I saw him spending 6 figures to locate a 26-year-old waitress in the Pacific Northwest, I needed to know why. So I went to the restaurant myself. I brought Calder. And I watched you interact with him the way I've watched every variable in every equation that matters to my business. I'm not a variable. I'm a person. You're both. And the moment Carver started hunting you, you became relevant to my interests, whether you wanted to be or not. The door opened without knocking. Eamon Pike's preferred method of entry. He moved like someone who'd spent decades in rooms where announcing yourself got you killed. Nix at his side, both of them assessing the tension in the air with professional precision. You told her about Carver, Eamon said. Not a question. I told her about all of them. Eamon looked at Zariah, and for the first time she saw something in his expression that wasn't clinical observation. It looked almost like regret. Then I suppose it's time I explained why I've been watching you since before you knew what being watched meant. He pulled a chair across from her, sat down with the careful movements of a man whose joints remembered old injuries. Nix settled at his feet, eyes tracking Zariah's elevated heart rate. "Your mother asked me to keep you safe," Eamon said quietly. 18 years ago she left you at my house and told me she was going to testify one final time. She said if she didn't come back I was to make sure you disappeared properly. New name, new city, enough money to survive but not enough to attract attention." He paused. "She didn't come back, so I kept my promise. You've been paying the trust account." Zariah's voice came out flat. "Estate Services, LLC, that was you. That was me managing funds she'd set aside before entering witness protection. $2,000 a month to keep you hidden, plus monitoring to make sure no one got close." His eyes were steady, unflinching. "I tracked you through foster care, through high school, through every job you worked, and every city you moved to. I made sure the record stayed sealed. I made sure you stayed invisible. Until I wasn't. Until the payments triggered the trust disbursement at age 26, and suddenly your name appeared in financial databases I'd spent 18 years keeping you out of." Eamon's jaw tightened. "That's when Carver's people started looking. That's when I realized I couldn't protect you alone anymore. So you brought Hollis in." "I brought Hollis in because his company acquired Sentinel's archived records, which means he has access to evidence your mother compiled before she disappeared. Evidence Carver thinks was destroyed." Eamon leaned forward. "And because Carver knows I work with Hollis now, which means he knows you're here. Which means hiding isn't an option anymore." Zariah looked between them. The billionaire CEO who'd monitored her like a corporate asset, and the intelligence operative who'd been her invisible guardian for 18 years. Both of them watching her with the same expression. Waiting to see what she'd do with information that rewrote her entire understanding of her life. "My mother's alive," she said finally. "And you know how to find her." Eamon's expression didn't change. "I know how to start looking. Whether we find her before Carver does is a different question entirely." Chapter 4. 3 days after Eamon's confession, Zariah was still processing the architecture of her own life. How every choice she'd thought was hers had actually been made by people monitoring her from positions she'd never known existed. She'd been a variable in someone else's equation for 18 years, and the math was only now becoming visible. Calder found her on the porch of the guest house, staring at the fog like it might eventually offer answers. He was holding a book about deep-sea exploration that was almost as big as his torso. "Nanny Claire says I need to return this to Dad's study," he announced. "But I can't remember where it goes, and the shelves are taller than me." Zariah looked at the 7-year-old, who'd somehow become the only uncomplicated relationship in her current existence. "You want help?" "Yes, but also I thought you might want to see Dad's study. He has books about everything, even things that don't exist anymore." There was something in the way he said it, casual, but with the careful pronunciation of a child who'd been coached, or who'd overheard adult conversations and was now deploying them strategically. Zariah couldn't tell which, and with Calder, it was usually both. "Your dad know you're inviting me into his private office. He's in Tokyo. Conference call. He won't be back for 3 hours." Calder shifted the book in his arms. "And he said I could go in his study whenever I wanted. He didn't say I couldn't bring you." The logic was airtight in the way that 7-year-old logic was airtight when they'd inherited their father's capacity for finding loopholes. "Lead the way." Hollis's study occupied the corner of the main house, where 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows met at 90 degrees, offering views of the coastline that probably cost more than most people's mortgages. The other 2 walls were solid shelving, dark wood, precisely organized, the kind of library that suggested books were investments rather than entertainment. Calder headed straight for the marine biology section, using a rolling ladder that was definitely not designed for children his size. Zariah steadied the base while he climbed, shelved the book between 2 others about bioluminescence and deep ocean pressures, and descended with the confidence of someone who'd done this many times before. "Can I show you something?" he asked when he reached the bottom. "Depends what it is." "A secret, but not the bad kind. The kind where grown-ups forget they left something where kids can find it." He led her to the filing cabinets built into the wall between the bookshelves, the kind of custom carpentry that made storage look like architecture. One drawer was pulled out maybe an inch, not enough to be obvious, but enough that the lock mechanism hadn't engaged properly. "Nanny Claire was looking for Dad's insurance papers last week," Calder explained. "She opened this, but then Dad called and she had to leave, and she forgot to close it all the way." Zariah should have said no. Should have told Calder that other people's filing cabinets weren't for 7-year-olds to explore, or 26-year-olds who were living in those people's guest houses under protection that might also be surveillance. She opened the drawer. Manila folders, alphabetically organized with the precision of someone who believed chaos was a moral failing. Most of the labels were corporate acquisitions, legal settlements, real estate holdings. But near the back, filed under S, Sentinel Systems, Personnel Archive. Her hands moved before her brain caught up. The folder came out. Opened. Inside were photographs. Not digital scans. Actual printed photographs from the late 90s. The kind with slightly oversaturated colors and dates stamped in orange in the bottom corner. Corporate events, office parties, what looked like a security training seminar. And then, 3 people in a lobby. Professional headshots, quality lighting. All 3 wearing the same security badge clipped to their jackets. Sentinel Systems, Security Division. The woman on the left was black, early 30s, with Zariah's bone structure and her mother's eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach her face. The man on the right was younger than the Eamon Pike Zariah knew. Maybe early 30s, no gray in his beard yet, but the same steady observation in his eyes that suggested he was cataloging everything the camera couldn't see. The man in the center wore a suit that cost more than the other 2 were making in a month. He had the kind of confidence that came from never being told no, and his hand was on the woman's shoulder in a gesture that might have been professional or possessive or both. On the back, in handwriting that looked like it had been written fast, "Final day before dissolution. EPMBTC May 1998. That lady looks like you," Calder said. Zariah's hands had gone numb. The photograph was shaking, but she couldn't tell if it was the paper or her or both. "That's..." Her voice came out wrong. She tried again. "That's my mother." Calder leaned in, studying the image with the same serious attention he brought to his deep-sea books. "She's pretty. Like you. But she looks sad." He was right. Maya Bloom was smiling for the camera, but her eyes were doing something else entirely. They were the eyes of someone who already knew how the story ended, and was going through the motions anyway. "Who are the men?" Calder asked. "The one on the right is Mr. Pike. The one in the middle." Zariah turned the photo over, read the initials again. "T.C. Thomas Carver. The one in the middle is the man who destroyed her." She heard footsteps in the hallway before she saw him. Hollis appeared in the doorway of his study, still wearing the headset from his Tokyo call, expression shifting from mild surprise to careful assessment when he saw what she was holding. "Calder," he said quietly, "please go find Nanny Claire. But, now." The tone left no room for 7-year-old negotiation. Calder glanced at Zariah, something like apology in his eyes, and left. The silence stretched. Hollis crossed the room, removed his headset, set it on the desk with the precise movements of someone buying time to choose his words. "When were you going to tell me?" Zariah's voice was steady, despite everything. "That you had photographs of my mother? That you've had evidence of who she was, and what happened to her sitting in a filing cabinet while I've been investigating blind for 3 weeks? I was waiting for the right time." "The right time for what? For me to find it myself? For your son to accidentally show me?" The photograph was still shaking in her hands. "You said no more surveillance without my knowledge. You said you'd tell me everything." "I said I'd tell you everything I knew." Hollis's eyes were steady, unflinching. "I didn't say I'd show you everything I had. There's a difference. That's the same manipulation you accused Marcus of, using truth selectively to control outcomes." "Yes." He didn't deny it, didn't apologize. Just stood there in his perfectly tailored suit with his Tokyo call on hold, and his son banished from the room, holding her anger with the same clinical precision he probably held hostile negotiations. "But Marcus sold your location to people who want to hurt you. I'm keeping information until you're ready to do something with it that won't get you killed." Zariah looked at the photograph. Her mother's face, Eamon's younger self, Thomas Carver's hand on Maya's shoulder like ownership. "She worked with him," Zariah said quietly. "She sat next to him in boardrooms and security briefings and corporate lobbies. She trusted him before she destroyed him. That's usually how betrayal works. You can't betray someone who never trusted you in the first place." Hollis moved closer, not touching but close enough that she could smell the coffee he'd been drinking during his 3-hour conference call. Close enough to see that his eyes weren't entirely steady, that whatever control he'd built his empire on was costing him something right now. "Your mother didn't just work with Carver," he said. "She built the entire security infrastructure he used to traffic weapons. She created the protocols, managed the certifications, trained the analysts. She made Sentinel untouchable, and then she discovered what she'd actually built and tried to burn it all down." "How do you know that?" "Because it's in her personnel file. The one that came with the Sentinel acquisition." He pulled another folder from the cabinet. This one thick enough to contain a whole career. Every evaluation, every project, every piece of evidence she compiled before she disappeared. "It's all here. It's been here for 3 months." Zariah took the folder. Her mother's entire professional life, archived and indexed, and sitting in a billionaire's filing cabinet, while Zariah had been living 200 feet away thinking she was investigating her own past. "You let me search databases and pull court records and track down dead ends when you had everything the whole time." "I let you learn how to investigate," Hollis corrected. "So when we go looking for her, you'll know how to think like someone who spent 20 years hiding from the best private intelligence network in the world." The fog outside had turned the windows opaque. Inside, Zariah held her mother's file, and her mother's photograph, and wondered how many more layers of truth were still waiting to be found in drawers she didn't know existed. "No more secrets," she said. "If we're doing this, if I'm helping you figure out why Carver wants me badly enough to spend 6 figures, then you show me everything. No waiting for the right time. No selective disclosure." Hollis nodded once. "Everything." starting with what your mother wrote in her final report, before she entered witness protection. He pulled one more document from the file. A single page, handwritten, dated 3 days before Maya Bloom officially ceased to exist. At the top, in her mother's handwriting, "They're going to come for Zariah. Make sure she knows how to run." Chapter 5. Zariah didn't wait for Hollis's Tokyo call to end. She walked straight into his office with the photograph in one hand and her mother's personnel file in the other, and the look on his assistant's face told her that people didn't usually interrupt Hollis Rowe when he was conducting international business at 3 a.m. Pacific time. She didn't care. He was standing at the windows when she entered, headset on, speaking rapid Japanese that sounded like numbers and percentages, and the kind of corporate language that translated the same in every country: money, leverage, acquisition. He saw her in the reflection, held up one finger. "Wait." She didn't wait. "When were you going to tell me?" Her voice cut through his conversation, like Nix cutting through a room to find elevated heart rates. "That my mother didn't just testify against Sentinel. That she built the entire system they used to traffic weapons to embargoed nations. That she made them untouchable before she tried to burn it all down." Hollis said something in Japanese that sounded like an apology, or a dismissal, or both, removed his headset, and turned to face her with the expression of a man who'd been expecting this conversation, but had hoped it would happen at a more convenient time. "Sit down. Don't tell me what to do. Then stand. But you're gonna want to sit for this." He moved to the bar cart, poured 2 glasses of scotch despite the fact that it was barely dawn. "Your mother, Maya Bloom, was recruited to Sentinel Systems in 1994. She was brilliant, quietly brilliant. The kind of analyst who could see patterns in data that looked random to everyone else. Carver recognized her talent immediately. Recognized it or exploited it. Both. Always both with men like him. Hollis handed her a glass she didn't drink from. He promoted her fast. Made her senior security analyst within 2 years. Gave her access to classified contracts, defense logistics, end-user certification protocols. She built Sentinel's entire compliance infrastructure, which they used to fake certifications and sell weapons to countries under embargo, which they used to make illegal sales look legal on paper. Hollis pulled up files on his tablet, the kind of documentation that probably shouldn't exist outside of sealed federal archives. Maya created a system so clean that auditors couldn't find discrepancies. She was that good, and Carver knew exactly how valuable that made her. Zariah stared at the photograph, her mother's hand holding a pen over documents that she didn't know yet were being used for arms trafficking to nations where those weapons would kill thousands. When did she find out? 1997. She was doing routine verification on an end-user certificate for a shipment to a defense contractor in Eastern Europe. The paperwork was perfect. Her own protocols, her own signatures. Except when she dug deeper, the receiving company didn't exist. The address was a shell corporation. The shipment was going to a government under UN weapons embargo. And she kept digging. She kept digging. Hollis's voice was grim. Found 6 months of falsified certificates. Hundreds of shipments. Millions of dollars in weapons sales to embargoed nations. Iran, Libya, Sudan, North Korea. All of it using the compliance system she'd built. All of it with her digital signature on the documents. The scotch glass was cold in Zariah's hand. She set it down before she could throw it. So she went to the FBI. She went to Eamon first. He was her mentor. Recruited her out of graduate school. Trained her in security analysis. Vouched for her promotion. She trusted him. Hollis pulled up another photograph. Eamon in his 30s. Wearing the same Sentinel badge. Standing next to Maya in what looked like a training seminar. He believed her immediately. Started helping her compile evidence. They worked together for 3 months. Documenting everything. Building a case that should have been airtight. Should have been. Until Sentinel's legal team found out what they were doing. Carver fired Eamon for unauthorized access to classified files. Claimed he was trying to steal proprietary information to sell to competitors. Had him escorted off the property with security footage of him accessing servers outside business hours. Servers he'd been accessing to help Maya build her case. Zariah felt something cold settle in her chest. They destroyed his credibility before he could testify. Destroyed it, buried it. Made him unemployable in the defense sector. By the time Maya went to the FBI alone, Eamon was under investigation himself. His corroboration was worthless. Hollis's jaw tightened, but Maya testified anyway. Gave the FBI everything she had. They opened an investigation. Brought it to federal prosecutors. Scheduled a grand jury. And then Sentinel's legal team filed a countersuit claiming Maya had fabricated the evidence out of revenge for being passed over for a promotion Carver had promised her. They produced emails, doctored but convincing, showing her expressing frustration about career advancement. They brought in co-workers who testified that she'd been unstable, emotional, making accusations without proof. They made her look like a scorned employee instead of a whistleblower. They made her look like a woman who couldn't handle corporate disappointment and invented an international conspiracy to justify her own failure. Hollis's voice was cold with the kind of anger that came from watching injustice through corporate machinery. The FBI investigation stalled. The grand jury declined to indict. By the time the Senate Armed Services Committee held hearings, that photograph you found, that testimony session, Maya's credibility was already destroyed. She testified anyway, gave them names, dates, documentation. It didn't matter. The committee thanked her for her time and moved on. Zariah looked at the photograph again. Her mother sitting between Eamon and Carver, knowing her testimony was going to be dismissed, doing it anyway because it was the only thing left to do. What happened after the hearing? Sentinel announced voluntary dissolution, claimed they were restructuring due to market conditions, paid out golden parachutes to executives. Carver walked away with $40 million and a reputation as a CEO who'd navigated challenging circumstances with grace. Hollis's expression was grim. Maya walked away with nothing. No job, no credibility, and a daughter to protect from people who'd proven they could destroy anyone who threatened them. So she ran. She tried to run, but running cost money she didn't have. That's when Eamon found her. Hollis pulled up one more document, a bank statement from 1998 showing the first deposit into the trust account. He'd been monitoring her, making sure Carver's people weren't following. When he realized she was going to disappear with you, he made her an offer. Let him manage protective payments, keep you both hidden, and if anything happened to her, he'd make sure you stayed safe. And something happened to her. 2 weeks after that Senate hearing, federal marshals contacted Maya, offered her witness protection in exchange for testimony in a related case. She agreed on one condition, that you'd be placed in protective custody under a sealed court order that made you untraceable. Hollis met her eyes. She left you with Eamon one night, told you she'd be back soon, and then she disappeared into witness protection with a new name and a new life, and Eamon kept his promise for 18 years. The office had gone very quiet. Outside, dawn was beginning to break through the fog, pale gray light making everything look washed out and temporary. My mother gave me up to protect me from the people she'd tried to destroy. Zariah's voice came out flat. And they came looking for me anyway the moment the protection expired. They came looking because 3 months ago, I acquired Sentinel's archived records as part of a routine asset purchase. Records that include evidence your mother compiled before she disappeared. Evidence that Carver thought was destroyed 20 years ago. Hollis's expression was serious. He doesn't just want to find your mother, Zariah. He wants to make sure that evidence never sees daylight. And he thinks you're the key to finding both. The photograph was still in her hand. Her mother's face. Eamon's younger self. Carver's hand on Maya's shoulder like a promise or a threat. Then I guess, Zariah said quietly, it's time we found her first. Chapter 6. Eamon requested the meeting in the estate garden at dusk, which told Zariah this conversation wasn't going to happen in Hollis's office under corporate lighting and surveillance cameras. Some truths required fog and failing light, and the kind of privacy that could only exist outside the architecture of power. She found him on the stone bench near the coastal edge, where the manicured lawn gave way to wild scrub grass and the sound of waves against rocks. Nick sat at his feet, alert but calm, the kind of presence that made you understand why armies had used dogs like this for centuries. They didn't just detect threats, they absorbed them. You wanted to talk, Zariah said, not sitting. I wanted to explain. Eamon's voice was steady, but something in his eyes looked older than it had 3 days ago when he'd first told her about the trust payments. Hollis gave you the corporate history, the legal strategy, the way Sentinel destroyed your mother's credibility and buried evidence. But he wasn't there the night she left you. I was. Zariah sat, not because she wanted to, but because her legs had stopped being reliable when Eamon said, the night she left you, like it was a specific moment he'd been carrying for 18 years. It was late May 1998, 2 weeks after the Senate hearing. Your mother had been living in a motel outside New Orleans with you, paying cash, using a different name every few days. She was running out of money and options. Eamon's hands were clasped between his knees, the posture of someone confessing, or praying, or both. I'd been monitoring her since Sentinel fired me, making sure Carver's people weren't following. When I realized she was going to try to disappear with an 8-year-old child and maybe $3,000 to her name, I contacted her. You offered her money. I offered her a system. The trust account. Monthly payments that would keep you both hidden but not visible. Enough to survive, not enough to attract attention. He paused. She refused at first. Said she didn't want me implicated. Didn't want to owe anyone. But I told her it wasn't a favor. It was a promise. She'd tried to expose Sentinel because I'd recruited her, trained her, put her in a position where she could see what was actually happening. Her testimony failing was partially my fault. Keeping you safe was the only way I could make that right. The fog was rolling in properly now, turning the coastline into something from a ghost story. Nyx moved closer to Zariah, pressed her head against Zariah's knee the way she did when detecting elevated heart rates that indicated decision-making stress. That's when the federal marshals contacted her. Eamon continued. They had a related case, another defense contractor, similar illegal sales. They needed Maya's testimony, offered her witness protection in exchange. New identity, new location, protection for life. His voice went quiet. She asked if you could go with her. They said no. Witness protection protocols don't allow minors unless both parents consent or parental rights are terminated. And terminating rights would have required documentation that would have made you visible to exactly the people she was trying to hide you from. So she chose protection over me. She chose your life over her presence. Eamon met her eyes, and for the first time Zoraya saw something that looked like grief. Maya came to my house on a Thursday night, May 28th, brought you with her. Told you she had to go somewhere for work and you'd stay with Uncle Eamon for a few days. You asked if you could take your backpack. She said yes. You packed books and a stuffed elephant you'd had since you were 3. Zoraya's throat had closed. She didn't remember the elephant, didn't remember Eamon's house, but somewhere in the architecture of her 8-year-old brain, there had to be a memory of that night, waiting to be excavated. She put you to bed in my guest room, Eamon said. Read you a story about a girl who could talk to whales. Kissed your forehead. Told you she loved you. And then she came downstairs and asked me to make sure you never tried to find her. Why? Because if you found her, Carver would follow. And if Carver found her, he'd kill her to make sure the evidence stayed buried. And if he was willing to kill her, he'd be willing to use you to make her give up whatever copy she'd hidden before entering protection. Eamon's voice was steady, but his hands had tightened. Your mother made me promise 3 things that night. 1. Keep you hidden until you were old enough to protect yourself. 2. Make sure you had enough money to survive, but not enough to attract the kind of attention wealth brings. 3. If anyone ever came looking for you, make sure you knew how to run. The note in her mother's file. They're going to come for Zoraya. Make sure she knows how to run. She knew this moment was coming, Zoraya said. 18 years ago, she knew someone would eventually find me. She knew that protection expires, that systems fail, that money and power eventually find ways around sealed records and trust accounts. Eamon looked out at the fog. The payments were set to end when you turned 26, because that's when she believed you'd be old enough, smart enough, strong enough to handle what came next. She wasn't abandoning you. She was giving you time to become someone who could survive what she couldn't protect you from forever. Nyx leaned harder against Zoraya's leg, warm and solid and real in a way that felt like the only certain thing in this conversation. Did she say goodbye? Zoraya asked. Did she tell you where she was going or who she'd become? Or how to find her if something went wrong? She told me she was going to disappear so completely that even I wouldn't be able to find her. That the only way witness protection worked was if no one, not her friends, not her family, not the man she was trusting to raise her daughter, knew anything that could be extracted under interrogation or surveillance, or the kind of pressure that men like Carver know how to apply. Eamon's voice broke slightly. And then she left. Walked out my front door at 2 in the morning with a federal marshal in an unmarked sedan. I watched from the window. She looked back once. Not at the house. At your bedroom window on the 2nd floor where the light was still on because you were 8 and scared of the dark. And you kept your promise. For 18 years. I tracked you through foster care, made sure the payments went through, monitored every database where your name might appear. When you aged out of the system at 18, I made sure you had enough to start but not enough to stop running. Every city you moved to, every job you worked, I was watching from a distance, making sure Carver's people weren't watching closer, until the trust disbursement triggered at 26. Until your name appeared in financial databases I'd spent 18 years keeping you out of, and suddenly 4 different parties started paying 6 figures for your location. That's when I realized I couldn't protect you alone anymore. Eamon looked at Nyx, then back at Zoraya. That's when I brought Hollis in, because his company had accidentally acquired the evidence your mother hid, which meant he had resources I didn't. And because Carver knows I work with Hollis, which means hiding isn't an option. The only way forward is to find your mother, retrieve whatever evidence she buried, and finish what she started 20 years ago. The garden had gone dark except for the estate lights behind them. The fog had turned everything beyond 10 feet into abstraction. She's alive, Zoraya said. It wasn't a question anymore. Somewhere under a name I don't know, living a life I'm not part of, she's alive. She's alive. And if we're very good and very fast and very lucky, we'll find her before Thomas Carver does. Eamon stood, Nyx rising with him. Your mother gave you up to keep you breathing. Now it's time to decide if you're going to use that breath to run or to fight. Zoraya looked at the fog, at the darkness, at the shape of her life rewritten by information she'd spent 18 years not having. I'm done running, she said. Nyx's tail wagged once. Truth confirmed. Chapter 7. Zoraya found Calder on the porch of her guest house the next morning, wrapped in a blanket that was too big for him, and holding a mug of hot chocolate someone had made, with the kind of precision that suggested staff had been trained in the exact temperature 7-year-olds preferred. Nick sat beside him, both of them watching the fog, like it was a movie they'd seen before but were still trying to figure out. Nanny Claire said you were sad last night, Calder said without looking at her. I wanted to make sure you're okay. Zariah sat down beside him. The blanket smelled like cedar and expensive laundry detergent, and the particular safety that came from never having to worry about heating bills, or whether there'd be food tomorrow. I found out my mom didn't die, she said. She's been alive this whole time, and I didn't know. Calder processed this with the seriousness he brought to everything, the way children did when adults finally told them truth instead of comfort. Are you mad at her? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. Zariah pulled part of the blanket over her own shoulders. She left me to keep me safe, but she also left me. I'd be mad, but I'd also want to see her. He looked up, eyes steady and older than 7. Are you going to find her? The question sat in the air between them, like something with weight. Not just words, an actual choice being offered by a child, who understood that sometimes the most important decisions came from the simplest questions. If I try to find her, Zariah said slowly, the people who want to hurt her might follow me. It could be dangerous. For her, for me, for your dad because he's helping me. For me too? She met his eyes. Yeah, for you too. Calder thought about this, took a sip of hot chocolate that left a faint mustache on his upper lip. Dad says dangerous things are just things where you need better planning. Like when I wanted to climb the big rocks by the water, and Nanny Claire said it was too dangerous. But Dad got me a harness and taught me how to use it, and now it's not dangerous anymore. Just planned. The logic was pure Hollis Rowe. Convert risk into strategy. Fear into preparation. Anything that felt uncertain into something that could be managed through sufficient resources and better information. You think I should find her? I think if my mom was alive somewhere and I didn't know, I'd want to know. Even if it was scary. Even if it was dangerous. He set down his mug. Because not knowing is scary too. And at least if you're looking for her, you're doing something instead of just being scared. Out of the mouths of children who'd spent 7 years watching their fathers measure everything in terms of control and outcomes, and had somehow learned that doing something was better than doing nothing, even when nothing was safer. You're very smart, you know that? Everyone says that. But I think I'm just good at listening to what grown-ups say when they think I'm not paying attention. He grinned, gap-toothed and genuine. Can I help? You already are, Zariah said. You asked me questions I wasn't ready to answer. That's how this whole thing started. The door to the main house opened. Hollis appeared on the path with Eamon beside him, both of them moving with the purposeful stride of men who'd been up since before dawn doing the kind of work that required encrypted communications and contacts in federal agencies. Calder hopped off the porch. I should go. Nanny Claire says I have a science thing. He paused. But I think you should find your mom. And I think you should let Dad help, because he's really good at finding things that don't want to be found. He ran back toward the house, blanket trailing behind him like a cape, leaving Zariah alone with Nix and the 2 men who'd spent the night planning an operation she hadn't officially agreed to yet. Hollis sat where Calder had been sitting. Eamon leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed, expression neutral but eyes tracking her the way he'd probably been tracking her for 18 years. Careful, constant, from exactly the right distance to see everything without being seen. Calder has a point about planning, Hollis said. We've been working on protocols if you decide to move forward. Protocols for finding a woman who's been in federal witness protection for 20 years. Protocols for narrowing down possible locations based on protection patterns from 1998, then using Sentinel's archived records to identify which cases your mother's testimony might have supported, then cross-referencing those cases with current investigations that might still have active files. Hollis pulled out his tablet. Eamon has contacts in 3 cities where federal marshals placed witnesses that year. We start there. And if we find her and Carver's people are already watching, then we make sure we get to her first and extract her before they realize she's been located. Eamon's voice was matter of fact, the tone of someone who'd done this kind of work enough times that it had stopped feeling extraordinary. The advantage we have is that Carver thinks you're leveraged to find her. He doesn't know you're actively hunting. Yet, Hollis agreed. Which is why we move now, before he adjusts his strategy. Zariah looked at the tablet showing cities and databases, and the kind of resources that only someone with Hollis's wealth and Eamon's connections could access. She looked at Nix, who'd moved to sit directly between her and the 2 men. Truth detector positioned to read everyone's heart rate simultaneously. If we do this, Zariah said, if we find her and retrieve whatever evidence she hid, and expose Carver and everyone else who profited from trafficking weapons to embargoed nations, what happens to me after? It was the question she'd been avoiding. The one that lived underneath all the others. Because finding her mother meant becoming visible, meant stepping out of the protection that had kept her alive for 18 years, and putting a target on her back that would never fully disappear. You become the daughter of the whistleblower who destroyed $1 billion arms network, Hollis said quietly. That comes with protection, legal, physical, institutional. But it also comes with attention. People will know your name, your story. You won't be invisible anymore. I've been invisible my whole life. I'm not sure I know how to be anything else. You learn. Eamon's voice was steady, the same way your mother learned to disappear. Except you'll be learning to exist instead of hide. And you won't be doing it alone. Nix's tail wagged once. Not excited, confirmatory. Truth detected, in Eamon's statement, in Hollis's offer, in the alliance being formed on a foggy porch, while Calder did science experiments with a nanny who'd been trained to keep children safe, but not necessarily to teach them that safety sometimes required courage. No more secrets, Zariah said. No more selective disclosure. No more monitoring me like a corporate asset while pretending it's protection. If we're doing this, we're doing it as actual allies. Which means I get to know everything as it's happening, not after you've decided I'm ready. Agreed, Hollis said. Agreed, Eamon echoed. And if we find her, and she doesn't want to be found, if she chose witness protection because she wants to stay disappeared, then we make sure Carver can't find her either, and we let her keep the life she built. Hollis met her eyes. But we give you the choice to know her or not. That's yours to make. The fog was starting to burn off. Beyond the estate grounds, the Pacific stretched out gray and endless, the kind of view that probably cost more than most people made in a lifetime, but right now just looked like distance, something to cross, something to survive, something that existed between where Zariah was and where her mother had been hiding for 20 years. Leverage is only powerful when you don't know you have it, Zariah said quietly. It wasn't a question. It was the thing she'd been learning since Hollis first showed her those transaction logs. That being invisible had made her valuable, that protection had made her a target, that her mother's absence had been the most powerful form of love Maya Bloom had been capable of giving. Your mother gave up everything to make sure you survived, Eamon said. She chose your life over her presence. Now you get to choose whether to find her or let her stay hidden. Either choice is valid, but only one of them gives you the truth. Zariah stood. Nick stood with her, pressed against her leg with the solid warmth of a creature who'd been trained to detect truth but had chosen to protect it instead. Then let's find her, Zariah said. Before anyone else does. And let's finish what she started. Hollis's smile was thin and sharp and entirely without warmth, the expression of a man who'd just secured an alliance he'd been planning for months. Finally, the right answer. The hunt began. Conclusion. And there you have it. Gamma Co 7, complete chapters of Zariah Bloom's story. From invisible waitress to the daughter of a whistleblower. From running blind to hunting with purpose. We've taken her from transaction logs and betrayal, all the way to the moment she decides to stop hiding and start fighting. Let's recap what we covered. Gamma Pound at Chapter 1. The transaction logs that revealed Zariah was never safe. Just valuable. Gamma Pound at Chapter 2. Moving into the Rowe estate. Bonding with Calder. Finding her mother's photograph. Gamma Pound at Chapter 3. All 4 buyers revealed, especially Thomas Carver, Gamma Coth man who destroyed Maya. Gamma Pound at Chapter 4. Calder's innocent observation. That lady looks like you. Gamma Pound at Chapter 5. The full confrontation. Maya's testimony. Armor. Gamma Countel the moment it expired, and she became visible to exactly the people her mother had been hiding her from. But here's the thing. Visibility also gave her agency. Knowledge gave her power. And choosing to stop running transformed her from pawn to player, in a game she didn't even know she was part of. Your turn. Help this story reach more viewers. If you found value in this storytelling breakdown, Gamma Coif seeing how to structure a corporate thriller with emotional precision, how to use a child as moral compass, how to layer information architecture across 7 chapters, helped you think about your own writing differently. Gamma Co, do me a favor. Asterisk is defined as FAI like this video, asterisk, if you want to see more story breakdowns like this. It tells me what kind of content is actually helping you craft better narratives. Comment below and tell me, which chapter hit hardest for you? What storytelling technique are you most excited to try in your own work? What story model should I break down next? Drop your suggestions. Gamma Coin listening is defined as foe and chapter. Share this video asterisk with a writer friend who's struggling with story structure, pacing, or how to maintain tension across multiple chapters. Sometimes the best way to learn is to see it done, and this 7-chapter breakdown shows the entire architecture laid bare. Is defined as foo, edo subscribe, and hit that notification bell time us asterisk, because I'm not stopping here. More story models are coming, more chapter breakdowns, more craft techniques that actually work when you're sitting at the keyboard trying to figure out how the hell to write the next scene. Writing is hard, but it's less hard when you can see how other stories are built, when you understand why Chapter 4's photograph discovery works, when you recognize that Calder's simple questions do more narrative work than 3 pages of exposition ever could. You've got the first 7 chapters of Zariah's story. Now it's time to write your story with the same precision, the same emotional architecture, the same understanding that every chapter should reveal one truth while setting up the next. Napped, the foundation is solid. The voice is distinctive. The emotional architecture is working. Now go finish your hunt. I'll see you in the next breakdown. And if you haven't already, gamma ko like, comment, share, subscribe. Damas. Let's build something here. Now write.